When Aaron called me out of the blue, I thought it was just a casual catch-up. But then he said the words that changed everything. "I need you to pretend to be my girlfriend." I laughed at first. It sounded ridiculous, like something from a rom-com. But as I listened to his plea, I realized he wasn't joking. Saying yes felt harmless, but I had no idea how real it would become. My life had always been predictable. At 27, I had a steady job, a comfortable apartment, and a small circle of friends who understood my need for independence. Relationships? They were a different story. My attempts at dating always fizzled out, and eventually, I stopped trying. I told myself it was because I was focused on my career, but deep down, I wondered if love was just something meant for other people. Then Aaron reappeared in my life. We had known each other since high school, back when things were simpler. He was the charming guy everyone liked, the one who could make you laugh no matter the situation. We weren't exactly close, but we shared enough moments over the years to stay connected. Birthdays, social media comments, the occasional "how's life?" message. It was just enough to not completely lose touch. So when he called me out of the blue, I was surprised. Aaron never needed anything from anyone. At least, that's how I remembered him. "I need your help," he said, his voice uncharacteristically uncertain. The Aaron I knew was confident, always in control, so hearing him sound vulnerable caught me off guard. We met for coffee the next day, and he wasted no time explaining. His family was hosting a big reunion, and his parents, particularly his mom, were obsessed with his non-existent love life. Their constant pressure to see him settle down had driven him to ask for something he'd never asked for before: a favor. "I need you to be my girlfriend for a weekend," he said, his tone serious but his expression almost pleading. "Just pretend, so my mom doesn't set me up with her friend's daughter, or my dad doesn't start another lecture about responsibility." At first I thought he was joking, but as I watched him nervously sip his coffee, I realized he was dead serious. Against my better judgment, I agreed. It was just a weekend after all. What harm could it do? Looking back, I should have known better. Aaron was charming, yes, but he was also unpredictable. And agreeing to this seemingly simple plan would turn out to be anything but harmless. The weekend with Aaron's family started harmlessly enough. I told myself it was just an act, that I only needed to play my part for a couple of days. When I arrived at his family's house, Aaron greeted me with a grin that immediately put me at ease. "You ready?" he asked, his voice full of mock seriousness. I smiled back, trying to ignore the flutter in my stomach. As ready as I'll ever be. His family welcomed me warmly. Too warmly, actually. His mom seemed relieved, her face lighting up the moment she saw me. "Finally!" she exclaimed, pulling me into a tight hug. "We've been dying to meet the girl who captured Aaron's heart." The words made me blush, though I played it off with a laugh. His dad, on the other hand, was less easily impressed. He gave me a polite nod, his sharp eyes studying me as if trying to find cracks in our story. At first, it was easy. Aaron and I fell into a rhythm, answering questions about how we met and what we loved about each other. We had rehearsed enough to sound convincing, and I even managed to charm his dad with a story about how Aaron had accidentally spilled coffee on me during our supposed first date. But as the hours passed, something began to shift. It was subtle at first, the way Aaron's hand lingered a little too long on mine, the way his eyes softened when he looked at me. It wasn't part of the act. At least, it didn't feel like it. And what scared me more was how natural it felt to respond, to smile back, to let my fingers brush his. By dinner that evening, the lines between pretend and real had started to blur. Aaron pulled out a chair for me, his touch light on my shoulder. His mom beamed, clearly convinced we were the perfect couple. His dad cracked a rare smile when Aaron shared a story about how we argue over movie choices, but always end up watching the same thing. I found myself laughing along, but deep down, I felt conflicted. The real trouble came later that night. After dinner, we sat on the porch with his family, the cool evening air making everything feel oddly intimate. Iron's mom leaned over to me and whispered, "You've brought out a side of him I haven't seen in years." Her words caught me off guard, and I felt my cheeks heat up. When the family went inside, leaving Aaron and me alone on the porch, I finally exhaled. "Your mom is really sweet," I said, trying to change the subject. Aaron chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "She likes you. A lot, actually." There was a pause, and then he looked at me, his expression softer than I'd ever seen. "You're good at this," he said quietly. "Almost too good." I laughed nervously. "Well, I'm just following your lead." He shook his head, his eyes locked on mine. "No, it's more than that. You're making this feel real." His words hit me like a jolt. I opened my mouth to respond, but nothing came out. The way he was looking at me, steady, unguarded, made my heart race. And for the first time, I wondered if I was the only one who was starting to feel like this was more than just an act. The next morning, I woke up feeling restless. Every interaction with Aaron felt charged, as if we were both dancing around something we couldn't name. And it wasn't just him. I caught myself watching him when I thought he wasn't looking, noticing things I never had before. The way his smile crinkled the corners of his eyes. The way he leaned in when he really listened. This wasn't part of the plan. And the more time we spent together, the more I realized that pretending to be Aaron's girlfriend was beginning to feel a lot like actually being one. The second day at Aaron's family home felt different, heavier. The easy banter we'd shared during our first day had softened into something quieter, more charged. We were still playing our roles, holding hands when his mom walked into the room, laughing at inside jokes we'd made up on the drive there. But now, it didn't feel like acting. At least, not to me. After breakfast, Aaron suggested we take a walk through the nearby woods. "It'll give us a break from all the interrogation," he joked, flashing me one of his crooked smiles. I nodded, eager for a moment away from the watchful eyes of his family. The woods were peaceful, sunlight streaming through the trees in soft patches. We walked in comfortable silence at first, the only sound being the crunch of leaves beneath our feet. But as we ventured deeper into the trail, I felt the tension between us grow. Aaron seemed to notice it too, his hands occasionally brushing against mine as we walked side by side. At one point, we stopped in a small clearing, the sunlight filtering through the branches above us. Aaron turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "You've been quiet today," he said, his voice gentle. I hesitated, unsure of how to respond. "Just thinking," I admitted finally. "About what?" he pressed, his eyes searching mine. I wanted to deflect, to change the subject, but the sincerity in his gaze made it impossible. "About how convincing we're being," I said carefully. "Maybe a little too convincing." His brow furrowed, and for a moment, I thought he might laugh it off. But instead, he nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "I've been thinking about that too." The air between us felt heavy, charged with everything we weren't saying. My heart pounded as Aaron stepped closer, his presence overwhelming in the stillness of the woods. "You've always been good at reading people," he said softly, his eyes never leaving mine. "What do you think this is?" I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. How could I explain the storm of emotions swirling inside me? The way my heart raced every time he looked at me. The way his touch lingered just a second too long. The way being near him made everything else fade away. "I don't know," I whispered finally, my voice trembling. "But it's not what we planned." Aaron smiled faintly, his hand reaching out to brush a strand of hair from my face. No, it's not, he agreed. But maybe that's not such a bad thing. His fingers lingered against my cheek, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. I knew I should step back, create distance, remind us both that this was supposed to be fake. But I couldn't. Instead, I found myself leaning into his touch, my breath catching as his hand slipped to the back of my neck. When his lips met mine, it was hesitant at first, almost cautious, as if he were giving me one last chance to pull away. But I didn't. I couldn't. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, and for a few stolen moments, nothing else mattered. Not his family, not the lie we were living, not the consequences waiting for us when this weekend ended. When we finally pulled apart, Iron rested his forehead against mine, his breathing unsteady. "I don't want to pretend anymore," he murmured, his voice barely audible. "Not with you." His words sent a jolt through me, a mix of exhilaration and fear. I wanted to say something, to tell him I felt the same way, but the weight of reality held me back. Instead, I stepped away, wrapping my arms around myself as I tried to steady my racing heart. "This changes everything," I said quietly, my voice trembling. "I know," Aaron replied, his tone steady. "But maybe it's time things changed." We walked back to the house in silence, the weight of what had just happened hanging heavily between us. I couldn't stop replaying the moment in my mind. The warmth of his touch, the sincerity in his words, the way he looked at me as if I were the only person in the world. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that we had crossed a line we couldn't uncross. Pretending to be Aaron's girlfriend had been simple, comfortable even. But now, the feelings were real, and with them came questions I wasn't ready to answer. What would happen when the weekend was over? Could we go back to being just friends, or had we already gone too far? I didn't have the answers, and that terrified me. But one thing was certain. This wasn't just a game anymore. And no matter how hard I tried, there was no denying how deeply I had started to care for Aaron. The final day of the weekend arrived with an eerie calmness that left me on edge. I woke early, the weight of everything that had happened between Aaron and me pressing heavily on my chest. The kiss we'd shared the day before had been more than just a fleeting moment. It was a crack in the carefully constructed facade we had built. And now, I wasn't sure how to move forward. Aaron was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, sipping coffee and chatting casually with his mom. He looked up as I entered, and for a split second, our eyes met, the memory of the kiss flashing between us. He smiled, a small, hesitant gesture, and I felt my stomach twist. How could something so simple feel so complicated? His mom interrupted my thoughts with her cheerful voice. "Good morning, dear. Did you sleep well?" she asked, handing me a cup of tea before I could answer. I forced a smile, nodding as I mumbled a polite response. Across the table, Aaron watched me carefully, his expression unreadable. The morning passed in a blur of small talk and family stories, but the tension between Aaron and me grew heavier with each passing moment. By the time lunch was over, I felt like I was suffocating under the weight of it all. I excused myself to step outside, needing fresh air to clear my head. I didn't hear Aaron follow me until he spoke. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low but firm. I turned to find him standing a few feet away, his hands shoved into his pockets. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by something softer, more vulnerable. "I know," I replied, my voice barely audible. He stepped closer, his gaze steady. "What happened yesterday? It wasn't just the kiss," he said. "It's everything. This whole weekend, the way we've been with each other. It's not pretend anymore." I looked away, unable to meet his eyes. "Aaron, this was never supposed to be real. We agreed." "I know what we agreed," he interrupted, his tone tinged with frustration. But things changed. You feel it too. Don't tell me you don't. My chest tightened, his words hitting me like a wave. I wanted to deny it, to tell him he was wrong, but I couldn't. The truth was written all over my face, and we both knew it. I don't know what to do, I admitted finally, my voice trembling. This isn't what I planned. It's not what I signed up for. Iron sighed, running a hand through his hair. Neither did I, he said. But here we are. So the question is, what do we do now? Before I could respond, the sound of footsteps interrupted us. His mom appeared, her smile bright as ever. There you two are. We're taking a family photo. Come on, she said, completely oblivious to the tension between us. The rest of the day felt like a whirlwind. Iron and I continued our act, holding hands and sharing smiles that felt too real to be fake. His family ate it up, their laughter and teasing making it all seem so natural. But beneath it all, I was unraveling. By the time the weekend came to an end, I was emotionally drained. As we said our goodbyes, Aaron's mom hugged me tightly, whispering, "You're good for him. I can see it." Her words made my chest ache, but I forced myself to smile and thank her. The drive back to the city was quiet. Iron and I sat in silence, the tension between us thicker than ever. I stared out the window, my mind racing with everything I wanted to say, but couldn't find the courage to. Finally, Iron broke the silence. "This doesn't have to end here," he said, his voice steady but laced with vulnerability. "We can figure this out, together." I turned to him, my heart pounding. "Aaron, I don't even know what this is," I said. "How can we figure it out when I can't even make sense of it?" "You don't have to have all the answers right now," he replied. "But don't walk away from this. Don't walk away from me." His words hung in the air, and I felt tears sting my eyes. I wanted to believe him, to believe that we could make this work. But the fear of the unknown held me back, keeping me from taking the leap. When we finally reached my apartment, Iron parked the car and turned to me. "I care about you," he said softly. "I think I've cared about you for a long time, and I'm willing to take the risk if you are." I looked at him, my chest tightening as the weight of his words sank in. "I need time," I said finally, my voice trembling. "I need to figure out what this means, for both of us." He nodded, his expression filled with understanding. "Take all the time you need," he said. "I'll be here." As I stepped out of the car and watched him drive away, I felt a mix of relief and heartbreak. The weekend had changed everything, and I knew there was no going back to the way things were. But whether we had a future together or not, that was a question I still didn't have the answer to. The days after Aaron dropped me off felt like an emotional haze. The comfort of my routine, which I had always relied on, now felt hollow. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it was him. And when it wasn't, I felt a pang of disappointment I couldn't ignore. What had I done? Agreeing to pretend for a weekend had seemed harmless at first, but now I was caught in the aftermath of something much deeper. I replayed our conversations over and over in my head. His words, his confessions, the vulnerability in his eyes when he told me he cared. I couldn't shake the memory of how it felt when we kissed, how everything else seemed to melt away in that moment. But the more I thought about it, the more uncertain I became. Could something real grow out of a situation that started as a lie? I threw myself into work, hoping the distraction would help. But even as I stared at spreadsheets and joined endless meetings, my thoughts always drifted back to Aaron. It was the little things that stayed with me. The way he smiled when he thought no one was looking. The way he always made me laugh. The way he made me feel like I wasn't alone. When Aaron finally texted me, my heart skipped a beat. "Hey, can we talk?" Simple, straightforward, but heavy with meaning. I hesitated before replying, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. What would I say? What could I say? We met at a coffee shop the next evening, the same one where he had first asked me to be his fake girlfriend. The familiarity of the place only made the tension between us more pronounced. Iron was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with his hands wrapped around a mug. He looked up as I approached, and the soft smile he gave me made my chest ache. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down. I nodded, wrapping my hands around my own mug for comfort. "I wasn't sure if I should," I admitted. He leaned forward, his eyes searching mine. "I meant what I said, you know. I care about you." His words hung in the air, and I felt my throat tighten. "Aaron, this is so complicated," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know if we can just move forward like nothing happened." "I'm not asking for that," he said gently. "I know this isn't simple, but I also know that what I feel for you is real, and I think you feel it too." I looked down at my mug, the swirling steam mirroring the chaos in my mind. He was right. I did feel it. But admitting that meant stepping into the unknown, risking not just my feelings but our friendship. "What if this doesn't work?" I asked, my voice trembling. "What if we ruin everything?" He reached across the table, his hand resting lightly on mine. "What if it does work?" he countered. "What if this is exactly what we've been waiting for?" I felt tears sting my eyes, and I blinked them away quickly. His words were simple, but they carried a weight I couldn't ignore. He wasn't asking for guarantees. He was asking for a chance. The next few days were a mix of cautious steps forward and lingering doubts. We started spending more time together, no longer pretending, but still unsure of what we were. It was strange, trying to navigate this new territory, but it was also exhilarating. For the first time in years, I felt like I was part of something that mattered. But it wasn't without its challenges. Some of Aaron's friends, who had believed our fake relationship from the start, were quick to notice the change in us. "You two look different," one of them remarked during a casual dinner. "Like something's shifted." They weren't wrong. Something had shifted. But neither of us was ready to explain it to the world just yet. We were still figuring it out ourselves, and that uncertainty made every step feel like walking a tightrope. Despite the doubts, there were moments that made it all worth it, like the way Aaron would look at me when he thought I wasn't paying attention, or the way his laughter seemed to make everything else fade away. Each small gesture, each shared moment, was a reminder that this wasn't just an accident. It was something real, something worth fighting for. As the weeks passed, the initial tension began to ease. We talked more, opening up about our fears and hopes. Iron's honesty was disarming, and I found myself letting down walls I hadn't even realized I'd built. It wasn't perfect, and there were still moments of doubt, but the connection we shared was undeniable. One evening, as we sat on the balcony of my apartment watching the city lights, Iron turned to me, his expression serious. "I know this started as a lie," he said softly. "But what I feel for you, it's the truest thing I've ever known." I looked at him, my heart swelling with emotions I couldn't quite name. "It's scary," I admitted. "But it feels right." He smiled, reaching for my hand. "We'll figure it out," he said. "Together." And for the first time, I believed him. The weeks that followed felt like uncharted territory. Iron and I were no longer pretending, but we were still figuring out what this new chapter meant for us. It wasn't easy. There were moments of doubt, lingering fears, and the occasional question of whether we'd made the right decision. But through it all, there was a quiet certainty that kept us moving forward. This was real. One evening, as we walked through the park near my apartment, Iron turned to me, his expression thoughtful. "Do you ever think about how crazy all of this started? he asked with a small smile. I laughed softly, nodding. All the time. I mean, who agrees to a fake relationship with someone they haven't seen in years? You, he teased, nudging me lightly. And you, I shot back, grinning. It was your idea, remember? We both laughed, the kind of easy, genuine laughter that only comes when you're completely comfortable with someone. As the laughter faded, I found myself thinking about how far we had come since that first phone call. What started as a ridiculous favor had turned into something I never could have predicted. It's funny, I said after a moment, my voice quieter now. When you called me that day, I thought I was doing you a favor. But now, it feels like you did one for me. Aaron looked at me, his eyes soft and full of understanding. How so? He asked. I hesitated, trying to find the right words. You made me realize how much I was holding myself back, I admitted. I spent so long convincing myself that I didn't need anyone, that it was easier to just be on my own. But you reminded me what it feels like to let someone in. He reached for my hand, his touch warm and grounding. You did the same for me, he said softly. I've spent so much time pretending I had it all together, but the truth is, I was just as scared of being vulnerable as you were. We walked in silence for a while, hand in hand, the weight of his words settling over me. It was true. Both of us had built walls around ourselves, convinced that we didn't need anyone. But those walls had crumbled the moment we stopped pretending. That night, as we sat on my balcony watching the city lights twinkle in the distance, Aaron turned to me, his expression serious. Do you ever regret it? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I shook my head, a small smile tugging at my lips. Not for a second, I replied. Even if it was messy, even if it didn't make sense at first, it brought me here. It brought me to you. He smiled, leaning closer until our foreheads touched. I feel the same, he said. You're the best mistake I've ever made. We sat there for hours, talking about everything and nothing, our fears and dreams spilling out as easily as the laughter we shared. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and that was enough. Over time, I learned to stop questioning the path that had brought us here. Life didn't follow a script, and sometimes the best stories were the ones you never saw coming. Aaron and I weren't perfect. We argued, we stumbled, we doubted, but we always came back to each other. And in the end, that was what mattered. Looking back, I realized that what started as a fake relationship had been the catalyst for something much bigger. It wasn't just about Aaron. It was about me, about letting go of fear and learning to take chances. It was about finding something real in the most unexpected of places. As we sat together under the fading light of the evening, Aaron squeezed my hand and smiled. You know, he said, his tone playful, we should thank my mom for all of this. Without her meddling, none of this would have happened. I laughed, shaking my head. I'll thank her, I replied, leaning into him. But only if you promise never to ask me to pretend again. He grinned, his arm wrapping around my shoulders. Deal. In that moment, as the stars began to appear in the night sky, I knew I was exactly where I was meant to be. What would you do if a fake relationship turned into something real? Have you ever found love in the most unexpected of places? Let us know in the comments below. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.